I really like the vision of a package that there are humans inside. I think that we forget that sometimes when we're frustrated or angry, or we see things on television and or somebody disagrees with us or has a different political point of view. And yet people get up each morning and put on their pants one leg at a time, just like we do. And somehow we all have to figure out how to get along. Being human is one of the greatest things that we can do, is to recognize that we are human, not robots, not perfect, not somehow separate from the world, but that we are here in this place with one another. And one of our greatest impulses is to connect with one another. We've seen that babies only thrive when they are touched, when they are loved or sung to. And to be in relationship, that is not for the faint of heart. I know when people are feeling hurt, it's easy to retreat. When we're feeling down, it's easy to back up and retreat and stay home. During the winter, it gets dark, and it's just easy to stay home with our blanket and put it over our head and pretend like everything doesn't exist. But to risk to be with one another. Someone told me about volunteering at Sojourner House recently, and I was reminded about the difference between volunteering at Sojourner than Community Table. And both are wonderful and valuable volunteer experiences. The Community Table is something that children can do, and you cut vegetables, you cook, and you serve, you have somebody to help you, and you're behind a counter, and you have a lot of space. It's a big place. Whereas Sojourner House does not have a lot of room, and it's very relational. People can be tired after a long day on the street. It can be cold. People can be impatient, and it's easier to talk with people one-to-one, and it gets in those cracks. It gets into our hearts a little bit closer, I think, when we are face-to-face with people who are struggling. And then we can see our own humanity in them, and they can see, hopefully, our humanity as well, that we aren't just there to give, but also to receive, to see that we are all human together. Are there places where we can be ourselves? I think that's one thing that people say, the topic of this month is vulnerability, but vulnerability is risky, isn't it? It takes a risk, and in fact, vulnerability, the word comes from, it means to wound. And in most cultures, to be vulnerable is a sign of weakness. Yet, being vulnerable is one of the bravest, strongest thing we can do when it's in a safe place. And that's easy for me to say as a white woman, or in middle class. It's not always safe, obviously, to let down your guard. I have an African American friend in Atlanta, and he will not drive in the North Georgia mountains. He will not drive in certain neighborhoods in downtown Atlanta. And So to think about, what are those safe spaces where we can be vulnerable? Will we be able to talk about a failure or a mistake? Gosh, that's a hard one. To come to someone and say, I made a mistake. Are they going to chew your head off? Are they going to hold you accountable, but realize that, humans make mistakes? It happens. Did you know that? I don't like mistakes. I like to think that I can not make mistakes. And sometimes I hold myself to this bar that just seems really silly because I don't hold other people to that bar. And we all have those things, right? Like you think, I should be able to play the piano perfectly, make no mistakes. Or I should be able to, bake a cake or whatever it is. And we hold ourselves to these standards, and yet if someone comes to us and says, oh man, and then we're easily able to forgive. And what about a private joy? Some of us have things in ourselves that are so tender that we don't even know that they're there. Maybe it's something that we've wanted to do for a long time and we're afraid to take that risk, like maybe to take violin lessons, or maybe to go on a cross-country trip by yourself. And those private joys, to share that with a friend or with someone is a tender gift. We handle it with care. And sometimes we've had experiences where our vulnerabilities have been used against us. I know that's happened to me in workplaces. When I was a stockbroker, it was a very competitive environment. And when my mom had cancer, my supervisor was really kind and said, go be with her. And but when I came back, there were colleagues who were like, "Oh, I'm gonna move around you and get ahead," and it didn't feel safe, to share my grief. I had to mask my grief at work, and that's just unfortunately the way the world is. So trying to find those places where we can be safe and have friendships and open spaces. And what about middle school? Middle school is the worst, or at least it was for me. Middle school is that place where we start trying on identities. Am I going to be an athlete? Am I going to be a musician? What is my identity? We start having hormones and might be questioning our sexuality or who we love or who we are. Or is the world going to end because of climate change? And sometimes we still continue to feel that way. But it's a tough time, and then people just rove in packs. That like if you're not sitting at the correct lunch table, or if you're not wearing the right label or whatever it is, it can be pretty brutal. And I think there is that us versus them somewhere in our bodies. I don't know if it's our reptile brain or what, but I know there's studies about people who are not like us, quote unquote, and we tend to group together. And so the people that moved beyond that are those people I think, wow, you must have gotten extra compassion put in your little salt shaker, because I think about the people who would go sit with the kid who was on their own, or who would stand up and say, "Don't push so-and-so." And I like to think that that grows in us. And when we think about our vulnerability, that's taking a risk. That's taking a risk to stand up for people. It's a risk to go volunteer at Sojourner House. It might change our way of thinking. It might shake us up a little bit. So I think it's frightening to be out there and to be seen. I've known some people who, the first time they ever marched was for Black Lives Matter or for some cause, or the first time they've ever sat at the UU Pride table, and they're like, "This is kind of scary, but I really want to be here and I want to support this because I care." And it doesn't have to be a march or a table. It can just be showing up for someone in an elevator. It can be showing up if somebody is making a racist joke or a blonde joke. That's not nice either. Whatever it is. So when we think about vulnerability, is it okay to cry? Is it okay to fail? Is it okay to show emotion like fear and uncertainty? I'm a youngest child, and I like all the emotions, because that's what we did. Youngest children in the birth order, you have to make a lot of noise to get noticed in a big family, and like most, I struggled with finding identity and my place within my family. I fought to find it in general, and one of the key identities that I did claim was strength. I could arm wrestle any kid in the 4th grade. We would go to the skating rink. I was strong, and we would, And I was a little scrawny kid too, but I was tough. I would sit there and I would do this and get them down, and I was so proud of that. That to me was something to laud. And I would wrestle with my sister, and I would climb trees and run around the woods, and to me that felt like I'm in control, right? Because when you're youngest, you're so not in control. I could run faster than my older siblings because that was necessary. And who had time for skating backwards at the skating rink when you could win arm wrestling competitions? And I was a 70s kid who grew up in the South. My role models were Wonder Woman, Charlie's Angels, Laura Ingalls Wilder from Little House on the Prairie. I wanted to be a strong, capable girl, not dependent on any boy to save the day. Being strong and capable is a core part of who I am now. I want to be able to do stuff. I started restaurant work when I was 15. I worked 3 jobs during college, and I was the one who was always asked to open jars. This was really important. And I would open the jar. Carl couldn't do it. Robert couldn't do it. I would open the jar. And in my jobs and personal life, capability and strength were one way I could show that I could take care of myself. And in my late 20s, I became a massage therapist. And my hand strength was a signature part of the massage that I gave, very deep tissue massage. And I had my own massage practice for 9 years until I became a full-time minister. And then the pandemic happened. In the heart of the pandemic, in March 2021, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And I had oftentimes when chronic illness comes on, it can be at the worst that it is because it shows up and then you try medications. And so at that time, I had crippling pain in my hands, swelling in my feet. I found it difficult to type, use scissors or can openers. I couldn't lift over 5 pounds. And I was afraid. I was really afraid. I thought, can I do my job? My congregation is depending on me in the midst of this damn pandemic. We were all afraid because of the pandemic, and then this happened. And besides the pain and discomfort, I was surprised by the emotional loss of the sudden change. I wasn't strong anymore, right? I had put all of my stuff into this physical capability. And even almost half a year later, I'm doing a lot better. I've been on medication and physical therapy, all the things that people do with chronic illness. But here I was at the dinner table, and I found myself, I was so angry. My mother-in-law needed a jar opened, and it was Aaron, my 16-year-old son, who opened the jar. And I thought it was ridiculous. Here he was just opening a jar of spaghetti sauce, but I was so frustrated because I was the one that was supposed to do that. And it's just, it tells you, how much we get tied up in not being vulnerable, tied up in our identities. And so it was the fall, and late fall, and Wisconsin is pretty unpredictable. Winter can come hard and fast, whether you're ready or not. And I had intended to put away the garden furniture, the pots, the soil, that everything needed to be put up. But I was having a tough week, and I didn't get it done, and I felt like a squirrel caught before gathering all my winter provisions, felt inadequate to the task. So luckily, 2 weeks after the snow, we had some melting and some Saturdays in the 40s, and I was able to work with Aaron and Carl to get it put up. We had to put up the furniture and all the heavy pots, and I had to ask for help. I don't like asking for help. I really don't. I wanted to be able to lift that up. I wanted to be Wonder Woman, Laura Ingalls Wilder, Charlie's Angels. But to ask for help is one of the strongest things that you can also do, because you acknowledge that you're human. And I think, that's a vulnerability. It's vulnerable to even talk about it. I'm like, I don't want you to think that I can't lift a pot. I want to be strong. But if we don't ask for help, then we're not inviting people to be with us, are we? If we do things alone and without input, without being a part of a community, we isolate ourselves. And so by entering into that relationship, by working with other people, by being relational, you give them a chance to also give. And I know sometimes people who have gone through illnesses are like, I don't want to bother anybody. I don't want to ask for a ride to the doctor. I don't want to ask for somebody to bring me a meal. But the truth is, for somebody, that's what they can do. You know, maybe they can't physically do a lot, but they can send a card. They can make a meal, and it means so much to be of use. We had a member by the name of Phyllis Whipking. And Phyllis was one of the most friendly people that you could ever meet, and she had shiny, sparkly hats. She was known for her glittery hats. And as she got older, she really grieved not being able to do as much. She used to be a volunteer and did so much in the community. And what she would do is she would sit down at a table, and we would send people to talk with her. And we'd say, Phyllis, you were the most friendly person. You are doing something by welcoming people. And so she would talk to new people. And that was her role. And she felt like she was doing something. And she was, because she was being friendly. And this is a story about a colleague. Her name is Aaliyah Kemmler. And she said, in the church I serve, we have a Sunday morning worship leader who welcomes everybody at the start of service. They give announcements, and including about assisted listening devices, and that they are available from the ushers. On the best Sundays, which don't happen as often as I wish, the worship leader would mistakenly say that assisted living devices are available from the ushers. I am always secretly rooting for this mistake because it makes everybody laugh. And because it would be so excellent if the ushers had assisted living devices to give out. I would raise my hand every time for one. And I know I'm not alone. A lot of us feel like our lives should come with instructions. Or maybe they did, but we only had a copy that got lost a long time ago. She goes on to talk about her marriage. 7 years ago, she left a marriage of over 2 decades. She says, we had 2 young children at the time, and during the day I would mostly live with the weight of my decision, but at night I'd feel guilt. Had I chosen my happiness over my children's? Would this be a terrible turning point in their lives? And at that moment, I would pray for operating instructions or some sign that we would get through all of this. And I was juggling ministry and motherhood and raggedly determined, driving around in a borrowed truck to collect some Craigslist furniture and writing sermons in the middle of the night. She says, a few months in, an older woman in the congregation visited me and said, I left my marriage with young children to raise. And I still remember how tired I was. You need to let us help you. And she started to protest, and she stopped me. She says, I started to protest. We know you're fine, she said. And you still need to let us help you. And luckily, I realized that this was the sign. Kindness offered from someone who has traveled our particular hard road before is always a sign. So I let them help me. Members of the congregation had paintbrushes and scrub brushes. They donated pots and kitchen utensils, some of them suspiciously new. They put together my children's beds and painted walls for our new apartment. And I was undone by their tenderness and healed by it. She says, none of us have a map. We are all just making our way as we go, but we can help each other get through the painful places because we have lived in them. And they really are assisted living devices. They really are. They are us, and we have each other. And I think the other part of vulnerability is being vulnerable to ourselves. We can fool ourselves. We are so good at fooling ourselves. And when we think about self-examination and sitting with our pain or sitting with our joy, sitting with our hopes and fears, it can be uncomfortable. But Jesus had his 40 days in the desert. Jonah had his time with the belly and the whale. In Star Wars, Luke Skywalker asked Yoda what he will encounter after his first test. Only what you take with you, he said. And Young said, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. In other words, the more we deny it, the more the power that shadow self has over us. So all this to say, we are packages that we need to handle with care. Be gentle with yourself and each other. I'm going to stop cursing my hands when they aren't working and be grateful that I have a son who might open a jar. Be grateful that I have a Kendra that'll help me stay up all night with youth. And maybe in that, we learn something, we grow, and we find other capabilities. We find other joys and other strengths. Amen.